Jack, welcome to the show. Jimmy began, keeping his tone light. You rarely make public appearances. What brought you here? Nicholson leaned back in his chair, removed his sunglasses, and shot a sharp glance at the host. His eyes, still piercing, scanned the audience as if sizing them up. Jimmy, I'm here because I'm tired of this circus, he replied in a raspy voice. All these safe jokes of yours, this censorship. Where's the real comedy? Where's the truth? The audience laughed, but the laughter was uneven. Older viewers, those over 55, nodded, reminiscing about times when comedians didn't hold back. Younger ones exchanged glances, sensing discomfort. Jimmy felt his palms grow clammy. His producer, Linda, was signaling from backstage. Change the topic. But Nicholson gave him no chance. Jack, comedy evolves, Jimmy replied, trying to maintain balance. People want laughter, but without offense. I'm trying to bring people together, not divide them. Nicholson snorted, his smile turning predatory. Bring people together? He leaned forward. You're not a comedian, Jimmy. You're a corporate kid, scared to say anything real. Remember when you apologized for that old sketch from the Man Show? What for? For being funny? The audience gasped. Older viewers erupted in applause. Many remembered the 2020 scandal, when Jimmy's Old Man Show sketches were accused of sexism. Kimmel had publicly apologized, acknowledging that the humor of the 90s didn't align with modern standards. But for many conservative viewers, that apology was a symbol of woke weakness. Nicholson had hit a sore spot. Jimmy felt heat flood his cheeks. He'd spent 20 years on this stage, balancing humor and sensitivity, but Nicholson's accusation struck at his pride. He remembered how hard it was to apologize, how the network pressured him, how fans split between those who supported him and those who called him a sellout. Jack, I apologize because I realize some jokes can hurt, Jimmy said, his voice growing firmer. But that doesn't mean I stop being a comedian. I just want everyone in this room to feel comfortable. Nicholson laughed, loudly, almost theatrically. Comfortable? He turned to the audience. Hear that? He wants you to feel comfortable. Jimmy, comedy isn't about comfort. It's about truth. And the truth is, you're scared. You're scared of those. He waved his hand, Twitter kids with their hashtags. You're scared you'll get canceled like those comedians you used to call friends. The audience murmured. Jimmy felt his heart pound. Nicholson had touched another raw nerve. Several of his comedian friends had lost careers over old tweets or jokes taken out of context. Jimmy had seen it destroy them, and yes, he was afraid. But he also believed you could be funny and humane at the same time. Jack, I'm not scared, Jimmy shot back, his eyes narrowing. I believe comedy can be sharp without humiliating people. And you? You seem to think humiliation is what makes people laugh. The audience erupted in applause, but Nicholson only smiled coldly, like in his best roles. Humiliation? He clapped slowly. Oh, Jimmy, you're waking up. But tell me, when was the last time you took a risk? When did you say something that could ruin your perfect image? Or are you just a puppet reading the network script? The camera zoomed in on Jimmy's face. Sweat trickled down his back. The audience froze, sensing the show was teetering on the edge of explosion. Linda backstage looked ready to rush the stage. Jack, I say what I believe, Jimmy replied, his voice trembling but steady. I believe laughter brings people together. And I believe you can be funny without making others feel small. And you? You just throw words around because you know you can get away with it. The audience exploded, applause mixed with cheers. Nicholson leaned back, his smile widening, but his eyes remained cold. Oh, you think I'm just throwing words? He said softly, almost menacingly. All right, Jimmy. Let's play. Tell a joke. Right now. Something sharp. Something you'd never say on your show. Or can't you? Silence. The audience held its breath. Jimmy felt time slow down. It was a challenge not just from Nicholson, but from everything he represented. The old school, where comedy was ruthless, versus the new, where every word was weighed. He knew one wrong joke could go viral on X and destroy his reputation. But silence meant defeat. "Jack, I'm not dancing to your tune," Jimmy said, his voice calmer but carrying strength. "My comedy isn't about shock. It's about people leaving here with a smile, not a grudge. If you don't like that, that's your problem, not mine." The audience erupted in louder applause. Nicholson stared at Jimmy, his smile fading. After a moment, he nodded, as if acknowledging a hit. "Not bad, kid," he said quietly. "But this isn't over." The show pressed on, but the atmosphere remained electric. Jimmy steered the interview, asking Nicholson about his career, but every joke, every response from Jack, was laced with tension. The audience sensed this wasn't just a show, it was a duel. Older viewers, who remembered Nicholson in The Shining or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, relished his sharpness, but also respected Jimmy for holding his ground. Younger ones waited for a scandal to erupt. Backstage, Linda clutched her phone, responding to network messages. X was already buzzing. Nicholson tore into Kimmel. Jimmy's holding his own. Jimmy knew he'd have to answer for every word after the show. But in that moment, he felt a strange relief. He hadn't backed down. He defended his stage, his principles. Yet Nicholson's words gnawed at him. Had he become too cautious? Had he lost the spark that once made him a comedian? And most importantly, what was Nicholson planning? His final remark, "This isn't over," sounded like a promise. As the show neared its end, Nicholson suddenly stood and extended his hand to Jimmy. The audience fell silent. "You're not bad, Kimmel," Jack said, his voice quiet but sincere. "But you've got room to grow." Jimmy shook his hand, feeling adrenaline give way to exhaustion. He smiled, but his eyes remained wary. "We'll see, Jack," he replied. The audience erupted in applause, but Jimmy knew this was just the beginning. Jimmy felt sweat trickling down his back, but kept his smile. He had just parried Nicholson's attack, who accused him of cowardice for apologizing over old The Man Show sketches. The audience applauded, but Jack seemed to be just warming up. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes glinting like an actor preparing for a pivotal scene. "All right, Jimmy," Nicholson said, his voice low and menacing. "You say you want to bring people together. Great. But let's dig deeper. Why did you apologize for The Man Show? Name one specific thing in those sketches that you think was so offensive you had to grovel to the network." The audience gasped. The question hit like a punch to the gut. Older viewers, who remembered the crude humor of the 90s, nodded, feeling nostalgia for those times. Younger ones held their breath, knowing the response could go viral on X. Jimmy felt his heart pounding. He recalled the 2020 scandal. Sketches where he and his co-stars joked about women in revealing clothing were considered funny in the 90s, but became toxic in the #MeToo era. His apology back then was sincere, but to many it looked like capitulation. "Jack, I apologized for sketches that portrayed women as objects," Jimmy replied, choosing his words carefully but firmly. "Like the women on trampoline segment. It seemed harmless back then, but now I see it could have demeaned people. I don't want my jokes to make anyone feel lesser." The audience erupted in applause, but Nicholson only snorted. "Women on trampolines?" He laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Seriously? That was a joke, Jimmy." People laughed. Women laughed. "And now you're saying it was wrong because someone in 2020 decided to get offended? Tell me, do you really believe that sketch was harmful, or did you just play along with the mob?" The audience stirred. The question was a trap. If Jimmy doubled down on the apology, he'd seem weak to older viewers who valued unfiltered humor. If he backed off, younger viewers would call him a hypocrite. Jimmy felt the camera zoom in, catching every twitch. "Jack, I believe humor has to evolve," he said, his voice calmer but confident. "I'm not saying we can't joke. But I want my jokes to be smart, not just shocking. If that means owning up to past mistakes, I'm ready." Part of the audience clapped, but Nicholson didn't relent. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Okay, let's try another," he said. "Remember when you used to roast politicians? Trump, Biden? You were sharp, Jimmy. But lately, your political jokes. How do I put it? Too soft. Why do you dodge the tough topics? Scared you'll be called out for the wrong opinion? Name one thing you wanted to say, on air, but didn't because you were afraid. The audience froze. This question struck another real vulnerability. Jimmy's political monologues were always a hit, but in recent years, he'd grown more cautious. After waves of criticism for jokes about conservatives and liberals, he started avoiding topics that could enrage either side. Older viewers, who loved his satire, noticed this and missed his former edge. Jimmy clenched his fists under the table. He recalled a joke about a recent political scandal involving social media censorship, which he cut from his monologue on the producer's advice. It was a sharp comment about how both parties use free speech for their own ends, but the network deemed it too risky. "Jack, I'm not afraid," Jimmy said, his voice firmer. "But I pick my battles. If I joke about politics, I want it to be smart, not just angry. I could say a lot, but I don't want my audience to see me as another shouting head from cable news." Nicholson smiled, but this time there was a hint of respect in it. "Careful answer," he said. "But you didn't answer. Name one thing, Jimmy. One topic you sidestepped because you knew it'd blow up. Or are you so shackled you can't even admit it?" The audience held its breath. Jimmy felt his throat tighten. He knew Nicholson wouldn't back down. And he knew the crowd, especially the older viewers, expected honesty. They remembered him as a comedian who wasn't afraid to challenge the system. But was he still that comedian? "All right, Jack," Jimmy said, his voice quieter but piercing. "You want the truth? I wanted to joke about how both parties play games with free speech. How they scream about censorship when it suits them, but are quick to silence others. I didn't say it because I knew it'd piss everyone off. But I'm not scared. I just want my jokes to make a difference, not add to the noise." The audience erupted in louder applause. Even some skeptical front-row viewers nodded. Nicholson leaned back, his smile widening. "Not bad," he said. "Finally, something real. But you're not ready yet, Jimmy. You're still playing it safe." The show continued, but every exchange was like a dance on a nice edge. Jimmy tried steering the conversation to lighter topics, Nicholson's career, his roles in The Shining, or A Few Good Men. But Jack kept circling back to the conflict, throwing jabs about modern Hollywood, woke culture, and how comedians have lost their spine. The audience was captivated. Older viewers relished his sharpness, recalling when Nicholson ruled the screen, while younger ones couldn't look away from the showdown. Jimmy held his ground, responding with humor but without aggression. He felt adrenaline humming through him, but also noticed something in Nicholson's eyes, not just anger, but exhaustion. Jack seemed to be not just attacking Jimmy, but challenging everything the modern industry stood for. And Jimmy began to wonder, was Nicholson really mad at him, or was this the cry of a man who felt his time had passed? As the show neared its end, Nicholson suddenly fell silent, looking at Jimmy with an odd mix of respect and defiance. "You know, Jimmy," he said quietly, "you're not hopeless. But you need to remember who you are. A comedian isn't someone who pleases everyone. A comedian is someone who tells the truth, even when it hurts." He extended his hand. Jimmy, surprised, shook it, feeling the strength in Nicholson's grip. The audience erupted in applause, but Jack's eyes held something that said, "This isn't over." After the show, a new challenge. When the lights dimmed, Jimmy headed to his dressing room, his legs trembling. Linda burst in, holding her phone. "Jimmy, X is exploding," she said. "Half are calling you a hero. Half say Nicholson crushed you. The network wants a meeting tomorrow. And Jack just posted, Kimmel thinks he won. Let's talk off camera." Jimmy froze. Off camera? Nicholson was offering a real conversation or another trap. He looked in the mirror, seeing exhaustion in his eyes. Jack's words gnawed at him. Had he really lost his courage? Had he become just a brand, as Nicholson said? But at the same time, he felt a spark of pride. He hadn't backed down. He'd shown he could be a comedian and a human at once. "What do we reply?" Linda asked. Jimmy took a deep breath. Right that I'm in, but on my terms. Jimmy held his ground, responding to Nicholson's provocative questions with poise but without weakness. Jack had just challenged him to name a topic he avoided out of fear of public backlash. Jimmy admitted to sidestepping a sharp joke about political censorship, but insisted his comedy was about unity, not division. The audience applauded, but Nicholson didn't back down. Unity? Nicholson laughed, his voice louder, almost theatrical. Jimmy, you're not uniting. You're dodging. Name one person you're safe, jokes have changed. One. Or are you just feeding the audience cotton candy, so they clap like trained seals? The audience gasped. Older viewers, who valued Nicholson's bluntness, nodded, recalling times when comedy challenged society. Younger ones exchanged glances, sensing unease. Jimmy felt his cheeks flush. Nicholson's question wasn't just an attack, it struck at his doubts. Did his show really change anything? Or was he just entertaining, avoiding real issues? Jack, I don't claim to change the world, Jimmy replied, his voice calm but laced with strength. But I see people in this room laughing together, even though they vote differently, think differently. If that's not unity, I don't know what is. The audience erupted in applause, but Nicholson only snorted, his eyes narrowing. Laughing together? He leaned forward, his voice quiet but sharp as a blade. Jimmy, you're kidding yourself. You know your jokes are just noise. You're afraid to say something real because then you'd have to answer for it. Like when you apologized for the Man Show. You didn't really believe those sketches were bad, did you? You were just scared of losing your pretty contract. The audience froze. The question was a dagger to the heart. Jimmy recalled the 2020 scandal. His apology for the Man Show's crude humor was sincere, but partly driven by network pressure. Older viewers who remember that era felt nostalgia for a time when comedians didn't fear offending. For Jimmy, it was a moment of weakness he still hadn't forgiven himself for. Jack, I apologize because I realized my jokes could hurt, Jimmy said, his voice trembling but steady. And I'm not afraid to answer for it. I'm here, in front of you, in front of everyone, saying I believe in comedy that lifts up, not tears down. Nicholson laughed, loudly, almost sinisterly. Lifts up? He turned to the audience. Hear that? He thinks his show is some kind of therapy. Jimmy, you're not a comedian. You're a corporate puppet afraid to say anything your boss wouldn't approve. And you know what? That's sad. I thought you had a spark. It was too much. Jimmy felt his blood boil. He'd weathered attack after attack, but the accusation that he'd lost himself struck at the core of his pride. He stood from his desk, something he'd never done during an interview. The audience held its breath. Jack, I respect your career, but you've crossed a line, Jimmy said, his voice calm but steely. You want the truth? Here it is. I'm not afraid of you or your words. I believe in my show, my audience, and that comedy can be more than your insults. If you don't like it, the door's right there. He pointed to the exit. The audience gasped, then erupted in applause mixed with shouts. Nicholson slowly stood, his smile gone. He put on his sunglasses, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical. You're kicking me out, kid? He asked quietly, with a menacing edge. Fine. But remember, the truth always comes back. He turned and walked off stage, his silhouette fading into the darkness of the wings. The audience exploded, applause, shouts, whispers. Jimmy stood, adrenaline pulsing through him. His producer, Linda, backstage looked like she might faint, but Jimmy ignored her gestures. He turned to the audience, forcing a smile. Well, that was unforgettable, he said, sparking laughter. Let's keep the show going. After the show, fallout and hope. As the lights dimmed, Jimmy headed to his dressing room, his hands trembling. He just kicked out Jack Nicholson, a legend, an icon, a man whose films he'd watched as a kid. X was already exploding with posts. Kimmel crushed Nicholson, Jack told the truth, and Jimmy freaked. The network demanded an urgent meeting, and Linda was running around with her phone, trying to contain the firestorm. In his dressing room, Jimmy sat before the mirror, staring at his reflection. His eyes were tired, but there was a spark he hadn't felt in years. He hadn't backed down. He defended his stage, his principles, his belief in comedy. But Nicholson's words gnawed. Had he become too cautious? Had he lost the courage that once made him a comedian? Linda burst in, holding a tablet. "Jimmy, this is insane," she said. "Half the internet's calling you a hero, half a coward. And Nicholson just posted on X. Kimmel thinks he won. But this is just Act 1. Jimmy's heart clenched. Nicholson wasn't done. But instead of fear, he felt an odd relief. He'd stood up to someone many saw as untouchable, and he'd done it not with anger, but with conviction. He'd shown comedy could be strong without humiliation. A knock came at the door. An assistant handed him a note. Jimmy unfolded it. "Meet me tomorrow." No cameras. Just the truth. Jack. Jimmy smiled. He didn't know what lay ahead, reconciliation or another battle. But he was ready. He recalled his words on stage. Comedy is about people leaving with a smile. And tonight, despite the chaos, he'd seen the audience laugh, cheer, feel something real. He folded the note and looked in the mirror. "All right, Jack," he muttered. "Let's play by your rules." The next day, the media erupted with headlines. Kimmel boots Nicholson, hero or coward. But for Jimmy, it wasn't about winning or losing. He'd proven to himself he could stand by his principles without losing his humanity. The meeting with Nicholson might offer a chance to understand what drove Jack: anger, disillusionment, or a desire to reignite the spark he thought Jimmy had lost. Or maybe it was just another challenge. For viewers, especially the older audience, the story became legendary. A moment when two eras of comedy collided. Yet instead of hatred, it left hope. Jimmy didn't change the world, but he took a small step, showing you could be bold and kind at once. And that step, perhaps, was the start of something bigger.